Morning, King Cove. Good to see you. My name is Pastor Corey. I'm a musician pastor here at Kent Covenant Church, and we are continuing this morning a series called The Next Normal. And our text today is from the book of Acts, chapter 9, beginning in verse 1, and we're going to go through verse 22. It reads like this: Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting," he replied. "Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. In Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision, "Ananias." "Yes, Lord," he answered. The Lord told him, "Go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight." "Lord," Ananias answered, "I've heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priests to arrest all who call on your name." But the Lord said to Ananias, "Go. This man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name." Then Ananias went to the house and entered it. Placing his hands on Saul, he said, "Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, has sent me so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit." Immediately, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength. Saul spent several days with the disciples in Damascus. At once, he began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God. All those who heard him were astonished and asked, "Isn't he the man who raised havoc in Jerusalem among those who call on this name? And hasn't he come here to take them as prisoners to the chief priests?" Yet Saul grew more and more powerful and baffled the Jews living in Damascus by proving that Jesus is the Messiah. Please join me in prayer. Bless us this day, O Lord, with vision. May this place be a sacred place, a telling space where heaven and earth meet. Amen. So, as I mentioned, this morning we continue our series called The Next Normal. And I wanted to just give you a little background of why we're doing this. As we have been talking and we are all experiencing this kind of progression out of pandemic life and returning to, or going, it's not really returning to life, or normal life. And, you hear, as you talk to people, you hear a lot of people say the new normal, as if that's something different, right? And it occurred to me that really there is no such thing as the new normal. There is only the next normal, right? The more days and months and years I get under my belt in life, I begin to recognize that there's just next normal. Because what's normal now will not be normal 6 months from now, maybe, will not be what I consider normal in 2 years or 3 years. If there's one lesson that I hope we've learned in this pandemic experience, it's that life changes, right? So one of the things that in my studies that I did was part of my work, postgraduate work, was in leadership, and we studied change dynamics. So I wanted to talk to you this morning a little bit about something called continuous and discontinuous change. Okay? So continuous change looks something like this. Continuous change is somewhat predictable change. It's change that you expect. It's typical. Things go up and down in kind of the pattern that we expect. One way to think about expected change is you might say, if you invest in the stock market, you hopefully, when you invest, know going in that is going to go up and down. Right? It's going to go down, it'll come back up, it'll fluctuate in between, it can be a little bit, kind of wide swings, but that's going to happen. So that would be continuous change. Another way to think about continuous change would be to think of our life cycle, or as, Disney had it, the circle of life, right? We're born, we begin to grow, we learn to walk, we continue to mature, we become full grown, we begin to experience what that means in our bodies as they no longer, or they begin to not do the things that we are used to them doing, and then ultimately we die. That is an expected, normal, continuous change. We as human beings expect to outlive our grandparents and our parents. We expect that one day we will have to take that part of the journey that is saying goodbye to our forebears. That is continuous change. Now, discontinuous change is disrupted, unexpected change that requires a new and completely different approach. Now, this is where, if you'll bear with me, my stock market analogy breaks down a little bit. But go to the next slide, please. That first slide was the first part of this graph. But then what you see is Black Monday in 1987, where the stock market dropped. The bottom dropped out. Right? That is discontinuous change. Right now, eventually the stock market went back up and all that. So again, the metaphor breaks down a little bit. But this is, if you were mapping out your life and you were going through life as normal and something unexpected happened that completely altered your life, to go back to my earlier image, say perhaps the death of a child. Right? That would be discontinuous change. The loss of a job, the loss of a career, any disruptive change would cause that kind of drop, right? That's discontinuous change. It requires a completely new and different approach. And if we were to graph it, it might look something like this. And as we get older, we recognize that discontinuous change is just as much a part of life as continuous change. Right? I mean, if there's anything we know right now, it's that discontinuous change doesn't follow any kind of schedule. Right? Pandemic, insurrection, verge of World War III, and we could go on and on and on, right? Discontinuous change. It requires a completely different approach. Now, our story this morning, we pick up in chapter 9. Saul has been persecuting the church. He's been coming after the church hard. And now he's kind of so hard that the church has, a lot of the believers that have left Jerusalem and they've fled this persecution. And a whole bunch of them went to this city called Damascus. And so Saul has gone to the chief priests and he's gotten a letter to go to Damascus and arrest these people and bring them back so he can finish the job that he started. So that's kind of a little bit of the background of the story. Now, one of the things we need to look at, and I want to be careful with this because, we can get into this tendency to take these biblical characters and kind of want to psychoanalyze and figure out, well, why would Saul do this and that and the other thing? And ultimately, that might be interesting, but there's really no way for us to know. But there are a few things we can know or see in this story about Saul that I think apply to us. The first is this. Just from this behavior that we see here, Saul getting this letter from the chief priest to go to Damascus to arrest these heretics. What do we know about Saul? We know that Saul didn't think. Saul knew. Saul believed to the core of his being that he was right. That he knew the truth and it was his job to protect it. Because if you don't know that, you don't do what Saul is doing. So Saul has this deep down, rock solid understanding of what the right belief is. And he knows that Jesus is not the Messiah, and these people are dangerous and they need to be stopped. Everything in his life, everything in his training as a rabbi, everything in his community around him, I imagine probably his family as well, all of that made him believe that they were certain of their beliefs, thoughts, and subsequent actions, that they were acting right, that they were doing the right thing. Right? I mean, he knows. He is not messing around. And so he goes to Damascus. He heads out to Damascus to finish the work that he started. And the text tells us that as he neared Damascus, beginning in verse 3, on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The risen Christ appears to Saul on the road to Damascus and shatters his life, shatters his understanding of everything. Now, there's a lot going on here. We could spend a lot of time in this text, but I want to look at just a couple of things that Saul had to revise in light of the appearance of the resurrected Christ on the road to Damascus. So 5 moves that this experience creates in Saul's life and thought. First move is that Saul has to come to the recognition that everything that he thought was right was not only wrong, it was being rebuked by God. That's a mind bender, folks. Right? I mean, everything you have been taught to believe with the earnestness of faith, with the confirmation of your religious community all around you, and everything is being rebuked because God is appearing and saying, "No, you've got it backwards." He was so certain of it, and the resurrected Christ just blew it all up. Second move he has to make. He has to completely revise his understanding of and judgment of Jesus and his teaching. He has to completely revise his understanding of Jesus and his teaching. Third thing, he has to completely revise his understanding of the Messiah, right? Now, we don't have time to unpack that, but if you've been in church for a while, you kind of know the story, right? That the Messiah was going to come and institute his kingdom and establish David's throne, right? It was temporal. And Jesus has come and just died on a cross and blown all that up too. But it's also clear that that kingdom was inaugurated by the death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus. It is now present. And Saul has to figure that out. Fourth thing that this appearance does is that Saul had to recognize that God makes no distinction between his followers on earth and Jesus. Did you catch it? Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? He doesn't say, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute the church? Why do you persecute those evangelicals? Why do you persecute those Christians? Why do you persecute me? And so in some sense, God makes no distinction between Jesus and his church. The link between Jesus and his church is indissoluble, can't be dissolved. It's inherent. And if you persecute the church, if you persecute God's people, you persecute Jesus. And then Saul was given a mission. Go. Right? He doesn't know what that means yet, but he's told to go into the city and that it'll be made clear to him. So what does all this mean for us? You know, the more I read this story and thinking about the way that Saul experienced discontinuous change on the road to Damascus, right? This appearance of the resurrected Christ requires a completely new and different understanding than what he had before. He has to adapt. He has to respond to all kinds of new information and different information. And I can't help but wonder if our certainty sometimes, if our certainty about who we are and what we believe and how that works in the world doesn't keep us from experiencing the scandal and dynamic power of the risen Christ in our lives. Now, I'm not asking you to question that Jesus is who he says he is. I think that this is very clear. But I am asking you to consider that the way we do and be and are church can have a lot of cultural accretion around it, a lot of cultural trappings that are really not necessarily of Jesus, which doesn't necessarily inherently make them evil, by the way. It's just the way we do things. For instance, you find yourselves sitting in pews. Where else in the world, in our lives, do you sit on long wooden benches? Nowhere. Well, where does that come from? Well, it comes from the mid-centuries, right? The Reformation period. Because prior to that, they all stood all the time. So, we stand for a few worship songs. They used to stand for the whole thing on cold marble floors. And then somebody came up with the idea, well, if we made these long benches, we could sit. Right? It's a cultural accretion. It's just something we do. Now, I once had a church, it's a long story for another day, remove the pews. You want to talk about sacred cows making gourmet burgers. But I use this as an example. There are a lot of different ways that the way that we are church has nothing to do with the resurrected Christ. And in fact, because we're so dogmatically committed to it, we crowd out his appearance. because we know what we know, and we know it's right. We were trained to know it's right. Just like Saul was trained and taught from the Scriptures that the Messiah was to come and to establish the throne of David and to throw those dirty, foul Romans out. So Jesus couldn't possibly be the Messiah because he died on a cross. So the application for us, friends, is to maybe ask the question, I wonder if our certainty about who Jesus is and where he calls us keeps us from experiencing the resurrected Christ. Saul had to have his life entirely blown up for him to see it. The resurrected Christ appeared on the road to Damascus, and Saul's life, as we know, was never the same, and neither was his name. We, in our Christian bubble, value, we prize, in many ways, certainty and rigidness in thought reflexively. Right? Just imagine if somebody came to you and challenged one of your confirmed beliefs that you have been taught ever since you were a young pup, what that might do to you. Now again, I'm not saying we should just willy-nilly decide to change everything, but I am saying that we should be willing to allow the Spirit to prompt us to examine what it is that we think we understand. It's called humility, and it's a virtue. We get rigid and sure of our rightness. We don't like to be challenged. We don't like our comfort threatened. And honestly, sometimes the longer we are like that, we get a little hard to live with. But the other thing I noticed about this text as I'm reading through this story is that it offers another way of being. It offers another way of being, another view of following. The text tells us in verse 10 that in Damascus there was a disciple named Ananias. And the Lord calls to him in a vision, Ananias. Yes, Lord, he answered. The Lord said, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street, which actually, I'm told, is still actually a street in Damascus. And ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision he has seen a man named Ananias, convenient, come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. Lord, no. This guy's bad news. You can't send me to this guy. Let me remind you what he's doing. Right? And so Ananias has this little conversation, which coincidentally, I love this in Scripture. You'll find this in a number of different places, especially the Old Testament, but here, where God appears to someone that he's calling to do a mission, and their response is like, wait a minute, let's have a conversation, right? And sometimes I think that's a good model of prayer for us. We need to learn to ask, to voice, to say, you know what, I don't think that's right. I'm pretty sure you're forgetting who this Saul guy is, because he's killing people. But the Lord said to Ananias, go. And then skipping a little bit, the text tells us, then Ananias went. Isn't that interesting? Ananias had verifiable information as to why he should not listen to this command. But the Spirit said, go, and after some conversation, he went. Then Ananias went. Friends, I think I've said this here before. You'll pardon me if I did, but I really believe this. You know, the longer I have been a pastor and the longer I have walked with people through life and see it in my own life, the longer I am convinced that the key to being a follower of Jesus is simple obedience to the Holy Spirit. Simple obedience to the Holy Spirit. Now, believe me, I believe in theology. I believe in doctrine. I got all the letters behind my name to prove it. I've gone all the way with that stuff. And I value it, and it's super important. And it needs to be done, and we need to know this stuff. But if that becomes the primary form of our discipleship, we will lose touch with the Holy Spirit. And we will become rigid know-it-alls who are impossible to live with. And we will find ourselves eventually, maybe on our own road to Damascus, sure that we are doing the right thing, supporting the right person, following the right politics, doing the right thing, and we will find ourselves where we did not intend to go and find ourselves somewhere that is not of God. But instead, if we develop a simple obedience like Ananias, that's willing to hear from the Spirit and engage in conversation, and then when the Spirit says go, the text says of us, and then so-and-so went. What if, instead of relying on our certainty and our theology and our doctrine, we relied on the leading of the Holy Spirit, and we went and did what we were called to do and were who we are called to be? What might happen? Well, I think this text gives us a glimpse of what can happen when we follow the simple guidance of the Holy Spirit. Because Ananias going, you can make the argument, Ananias going was a fulcrum on which history rested. The greatest missionary in our tradition, Paul. If Ananias says, you know, God, this guy's killing people, I'm not going. Now, God probably would have found somebody else, but, you know, who knows? But my argument is, imagine what happens. So what happens when we simply obey? When the Spirit says go and we go? We can't know. We can't know, but it can be pretty amazing, world-changing, in fact. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for your love for us. We thank you that you pursue us, even in the midst of our certainty, even in the midst of knowing that we are right. You disrupt our lives. You turn them upside down. And you bring sight to our blind eyes. God, may it be so in us. Amen.